Before we talk about the history of the medical services here at Milbank, I must go back slightly and briefly recap on the journey that brought us and the college and the hospital to this site. In the late 19th century, England lagged quite far behind with the continent. We did not have a military medical school in this country. And our education of military doctors was quite far behind the continent. There were medical schools at Lille, Strasbourg, Metz, Vienna, Copenhagen, St. Petersburg and Berlin. But no thought was given to opening one in England until after the Crimean War of 1854 and 1856. The reforms of our army medical services brought about after the Crimean War resulted in the practical army medical school being established first at Chatham in 1860, and then it moved to the new military hospital at Netley, close to Southampton, in April 1863. But the early days of the school were very troubled, and over the next few years there were attempts by the government to close it down because they said it was costing too much money, and they thought that doctors, once they'd been trained, would only stay in the army for a few years. The army medical services in this country underwent many changes after our war in South Africa from 1899 to 1902. One of the recommendations was, in this report, that there should be an Army Medical Staff College situated close to a new hospital in London. Eminent civilian surgeons voiced their opinion that this is what we needed in this country for our army, and eventually, and they also said that a large military hospital should be opened in London to be close to the big medical colleges that were in this city. The need for a new military hospital had been identified late in the 19th century. We had a garrison hospital in London, we had guards hospitals in London for our regiment of guards. But there was much controversy about them. They said what terrible hospitals they were, and there was a campaign to have them closed down. And the British Medical Journal reported the proposed build of a new hospital in March 1897. And the site chosen, as we've heard, was land previously occupied by the Penitentiary here at Milbank. Eventually, the hospital was officially opened by the King, accompanied by his wife Alexandra and his daughter Victoria, on the 1st of July 1905. And they named, as a consequence, 3 of the hospital wards after the royal family, and the other wards we named after our military doctors that had been awarded the nation's highest gallantry award, the Victoria Cross. Now, the college did not immediately join in on this new site. It moved into hired rooms in London in 1902 until the site for the new college was completed just along the road from the hospital. And eventually it officially opened its doors on the 15th of May 1907. And just briefly, I'm sure you can recognise where we are. There we have the Tate Gallery here. This is the old hospital, now used by the Tate Gallery. And our college site is this, just here. So we're really sat in one of these buildings just along here. And this gives you a plan then of where we are. So the River Thames is just, as you can see, just out behind you. And here we have Atterbury Street, which is just down the side of us here. And of course Grosvenor Road goes along here. Now, the architects of the college were Messrs Wood and Ainslie, and the design was well thought out. It included laboratories, lecture theatres, offices, space for part of the museum collection. We had a big medical museum at that time, and of course, where we sit now, the officers' mess. And there was a large parade square to the rear, and quarters were built for the soldiers that were going to work in this college and also the hospital. So let's look at the design now more closely. So this is actually the design for the college. And we must remember there are two parts to this site. There is the college and the officers' mess. And eventually they were connected by a bridge. The bridge has now been demolished since Chelsea College of Art took over the building. So this is the college site and the laboratory block. And you can see, hopefully, if it's in focus for you, and it's not for me with my eyes and my glasses, that it contains the big lecture theatre in the middle, and it has classrooms and it has the various laboratories that I've already mentioned. And the first and the second floor as well. And you can see, once again, this is the big lecture theatre, and above it we have the site for the museum. And I think, did they go on a tour of the site this morning of the college in Frankfurt? Presumably you went into that big library as well, did they?
Yeah.
Now the college was governed by a commandant and a director of studies, and it commenced teaching in interest. It ran courses for officers on promotion, except during the First World War, when we decided that we ought to use this site for more important things, and all classes stopped. But in its early days, it was a scene of much investigative work into disease, especially tropical diseases, and it was the home of many famous military doctors such as David Bruce and William Leishman, which are names very familiar to people sitting in the front rows here. In 1908, the officers' mess, where we sit today, was officially opened, and it was eventually connected, as I said earlier, to the college by a bridge. So this is where we sit now, along this frontier of this building. In 1915, the King visited the mess, but it closed its doors as I said, along with the college in June 1916, and it was converted to offices for the duration of the First World War. And if we look at some of the early photographs, once again, this is the plan of the mess itself, because I don't know how far up the building you went. There were many bedrooms upstairs for officers. And again, the upper ground floor and the lower ground floor. But do you recognise this photograph? There's the fireplace. Just there. So you can see that the walls were adorned with portraits, and if you look, you'll still see the rails up on the wall where the big portraits were suspended from on their chains. And of course, the walls were adorned with animal heads, because it should be remembered that in this early period of the 20th century, army officers still played much in the fact that they could hunt, especially those that had been to India. And of course, military doctors that had been stationed in India went hunting, brought their trophies back with them. But this is the room that we're now in today. And the corridors as well. This is the corridor outside this door here. And once again, you can see it's adorned with many animal heads. If we were to pull back these doors now behind the screen and perhaps go back 100 years or even less than that, this is how some of us remember Milbank, not perhaps with two big long tables there, but certainly we remember this room next door, laid out for many dinners. And these big portraits here were all of our senior doctors and senior military doctors, recall the Director General of the Army Medical Services. And these went back, some of these portraits were of doctors that served over 100 years ago. And this, the stairwell here, and certainly in my time, and many of the people here, we remember these stairwells were adorned with the medals and decorations of many of our senior medical officers. But this stairwell itself leads down to the doors below us, which go out onto Milbank. And unfortunately, those doors were very rarely ever opened. I think they were only ever opened when the Queen Mother came, I think. Am I right, Frank? I think that was the only ever time I saw them open, when our royalty visited this site. Now, in 1909, the grand statue of one of our most well-known and senior army doctors, Sir James McGregor, was moved from Chelsea into the courtyard. Just if we look out, if we go out in the corridor and look down out the window, we called it the McGregor Courtyard. I don't know what it's called now, but this was the statue of Sir James McGregor that used to stand there. And he served as our Director General, our most senior army doctor, for 36 years, the longest. The only person to ever serve as long as that as the senior army doctor in the British Army. It stayed there until 2002, and in 2002 we got permission from Westminster Council to lift it up and to move it to our new headquarters down near where I work in Camberley in Surrey. When we lifted it up, we found several things underneath the statue. We found some old bottles and some coins. So he now sits outside of our big headquarters, the big Army Medical Directorate. Now, during the First World War, this college became the centre for the production of vaccines, including vaccines against tetanus. And in April 1915, when the Germans first used poison gas against the Allies, we then, on this site here, devised and tested protection against gas warfare and respirators and gas helmets. And most of the testing was done in the cellars of the college and on the big, what we called the Parade Square, and now your sort of piazza, or whatever you call it, out there. So this is where we tested all our gas protection, our respirators and our gas helmets. Later in the war, we also did work on nutrition for the British soldier. Now, if we look at the hospital had a chapel. It was built on the classical style of plain red brick, and it was lined with oak panelling. This is inside of the chapel, which is now situated in the building the other side of the Thames. So it's all lined with oak. And many of the stained glass windows. Now, we'll just go back to that one, it's on this one. We've recently rediscovered this altar rail and all this oak panelling in a cellar. It was taken from the chapel when the hospital was demolished. When the hospital was, we moved out of the hospital, and we've now rediscovered it. So we're trying to reinstate it in another chapel, because it is all engraved along here. We presented it to the chapel, and some of the other panelling has inscriptions on as well. Here's just another view of it. The chapel itself was dedicated by King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra on the 24th of June 1909. But many of the stained glass windows are eventually removed. We have them in our memorial chapel down where I work, down in Surrey, so they are not really lost. From the hospital's point of view, it functioned as a general hospital. Shortly after the First World War, the number of beds were enlarged to 220. On the 27th of June 1928, the Thames flooded to a height of 6 feet. So the Thames came over its embankment, and as a consequence, part of the hospital became waterlogged. Now, between the wars, the First World War and the Second World War, normal teaching at this college resumed. It was the centres for the Army's pathology department, and at the start of the Second World War, once again, reorganisation of the function of this college took place. Vaccine production was moved out of London, because obviously there was more emphasis on bombing. And the focus of attention here became tropical medicine, soldiers' rations, so you always got to keep a soldier happy as long as he's got his food, clothing, water supply, and a major study was carried out on the effects of nepocrine. During the Second World War, much of the hospital was evacuated because, of course, we were worried about the German Blitz. And at 2:25 a.m. on the 16th of September 1940, the area of Bulinka Street was bombed, and the result was that the day rooms of both Shavas and Queen Alexandra wards over in the hospital were demolished, and severe damage to the operating theatre and some damage to that chapel that you've just seen. Ironically, in the hospital at the time was a German pilot who'd been shot down and wounded, and they brought him here to treat him. So he was in the hospital while he was being bombed by his own side. And the bombing resulted in the damage to the college, and as a result we then moved more of our work, especially the Hygiene Compartment, down to Mitchell in Surrey, which is where I now work. And you can see at the end of the war, certainly, the people that worked here in the army were called Number 18 Company REMC, and certainly there was a children's tea party in May 1946 after victory was announced, and we had Victory in Europe Day. Post-war, the college resumed its teaching of officers' courses, including from the late 1940s to the early 1960s to national service officers. Again, hygiene and tropical medicine featured, and the following subjects were taught: army health, pathology, military surgery and psychiatry. And we trained all our soldiers here who specialised in working in military hospital laboratories. And once again, after the war, the hospital expanded and became a teaching hospital and a school of nursing, and it specialised in oncology, so the treatment of cancers, ear, nose and throat, amongst others. But in the late 1960s, there was a review of the hospital provision to the army, and it resulted eventually in a new military hospital being built in southeast London at Woolwich. And this would take over the duties not only of the Milbank Hospital, but several other military hospitals from around the south of England. And on the 27th of April 1977, the remaining patients were moved out of the hospital here at Milbank and transferred to the new Queen Elizabeth Military Hospital at Woolwich. And Queen Alexandra's Military Hospital finally closed its doors. Now, obviously a subject close to my heart, the museum and the library. When the original medical school moved to London, so did the library and museum. The library was originally founded in 1822 and finally moved to London in 1922. It held many, many rare books on medicine, military history and the history of the Army Medical Services. Some of these volumes were destroyed by fire and water during the air raid in September 1940, and when the college closed its doors, many of the books were transferred to Gosport, to the library down there, and luckily for me, we certainly found a lot of the books hidden away in an old room upstairs, and we transferred them all to the Army Medical Services Museum at Mitchell. From the museum point of view, again, much came over to London initially, but over a period of time, the pathology part of the museum has disappeared, sent out to other hospitals and transferred or loaned to various other hospitals. And much of it was also damaged during the flood that I previously mentioned and the bombing. Now, really nothing remains of the pathology collection that in its early days was so large. But some of the historical collection from the museum obviously forms part of our museum down at Mitchell. This shows another use of the big parade square. So the entrance to the college is over here. The entrance of the college is this way. This is what we used to call the old sergeant's mess, and the back entrance was through here. That to us was the guard room, and this was the soldiers' block here. So this is a big annual competition that used to be held until some years ago, where we used to test our volunteer soldiers in their first aid. For the Royal Army Medical College, for this site, its days were numbered, and it would eventually combine with the Army, with the Air Force and the Navy to form the Defence Medical College. But the Ministry of Defence was looking to reduce the number of big grand buildings it held. It decided that buildings such as this are worth a lot of money. Did we really need them? Could we sell some of them? Eventually they decided to sell this site. So sadly for us, on the 14th of December 2000, we had to be moved out of here, lock, stock and barrel. Oh, it's just a photograph of the library as some of us remember it. Not so much with these cases in there, but certainly full of these books. It was such a grand place. Typical old library. So, 14th of December 2000. This is Captain Walker, who is locking the gates for the final time of Milbank. And we moved out at this site. And this site was eventually sold by the Ministry of Defence for £38 million. And you bought it. So, the site had been the home of the REMC for almost 100 years. And many of us here still retain fond memories of coming here to dinners, some people working here. And we still enjoy coming back here. Thank you.